What's up, everybody? This is the next episode of the show, and today I have JJ Zettle. Me and him are going to talk a little bit about some emerging technologies, some stuff about voting and possible technology fixes, and pandemic technology solutions, I guess. So, JJ, you want to go ahead and talk about who you are, what you do for a living, and these important subjects.
Yeah, my name is JJ Zettle, as Seth mentioned, and I work for a small software company based out of London that specializes in real-time data. And then on the side, I also do real estate, but that's a whole nother topic of where I get into local politics. But yeah, no, one of the things that kind of come up is Seth and I had been talking on the side was how real-time data is relevant, how we're lacking it in the areas of potentially things like reporting on the pandemic and also how it correlates into even the voting world. These are kind of two controversial topics that kind of come to my mind as I've been kind of thinking a little bit more about it as time goes on.
Okay, so just so everybody knows, what's your background as far as the technology goes, so that we kind of know where you're coming from on the real-time data? You're working for a software company, so you obviously have some education. I know you went to school for it, but just so everybody else knows, kind of explain your work history and kind of like what your education is on that.
Yeah, so a lot of a lot of my background in real time is mostly regarding to this particular position. I actually specialize in user computing. And throughout the years, a lot of the data was not real time. A
Right.
lot of the going back to like 7 years ago, during what I call the 2014 retail breaches, when Target got popped and Michaels got popped, and a lot of these big name retailers. Part of the reason that they were not able to fight off the attackers was the lack of real time data. They were
Hmm.
constantly 2 to 3 days behind. They were looking at logs and going through and to not get too boring about it, right? They just they couldn't figure out where people were in their systems.
Right.
Fast forward to today, I have technology that enables me to see wherever a particular individual might be logged in
Hmm.
and where particular activity might be going on, literally in milliseconds. Like like
Wow. Okay.
like boom. I say, show me everywhere this particular individual's logged in. Literally, about 3 seconds later, I know the 20 machines that if there's something going on, that maybe a what's called a bad actor has potentially logged into and is doing. And
Okay.
if there's a particular process, and I want to find it to get a little bit techier, if I want to find a process by its hash where it's running, again, I could also find that in seconds.
Okay.
And 7 years ago, that wasn't possible. Today it is. So when we start talking about how that correlates into something such as data around the COVID or voting, all of a sudden, what we didn't imagine was possible, things that we didn't think were secure or safe 7 years ago, now we have the technology to actually pull data directly from people's devices, their phones, their laptops, their computers, their tablets, pull that data in real time,
Hmm.
both to get actually where we're at with counts with regards to COVID cases, COVID deaths, things of that nature, and as well as when you turn it towards voting, obviously we ran into a lot of voter fraud and people basically pointing fingers at the different types of voting systems that realistically are it's 20 to 30 to 40 to 50-year-old technology, scantron technology that we're
Uh-huh.
using for voting, and we're not able to do it in real time. We had to wait what a week to actually get the actual results of our
Yeah.
election this
Yeah.
round. So I think it can be improved upon. I think it's in the best interest of our country and the world actually to come up with systems that enable real-time voting and real-time tracking of things such as a pandemic.
Okay, so I've got actually two trains of thought based on what you just said, and I think people immediately when you're talking about real time analysis from their tablets and devices, privacy flags go off immediately.
Yeah, right.
So how are you navigating privacy concerns for that kind of thing? To where it's transparent, because I don't think most people would even realize that they are being tracked like that. And to a lot of people, it's going to seem very 1984, Big Brother-ish.
Right.
Sometimes I'm looking around and I'm like, you guys know that book was a warning, not a manual, right?
Right.
like, and then there's also why did this technology suddenly emerge? I mean, I know there's better technologies coming out, but was it the retail hacks that I remember from Target, and like I think there was like insurance companies that were getting hit and stuff, and all these data breaches? Did that suddenly necessitate that this technology be main tracked basically for development? So
I, I think so. I mean, I think there's multiple needs. I think the security needs, and actually I'm answering backwards, but like
that's fine.
um, the the security needs around. I mean, obviously the largest breach was actually the federal government. 1.4 billion records. Anybody that's ever had a security clearance, your data's out there.
Oh,
That
now
that
I just found out this now.
so that and that was I believe a government agency. I believe China was responsible for that one.
Okay,
And so like, but basically the need to move faster regardless has always been out there. People have always wanted to move faster. It was
right.
just finding the way to do it. And I think we got stuck for a long period of time that we didn't need to move that fast.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to say if it was just the breaches that kind of forced that nature, or if there was just the natural progression of industry and being competitive.
Right.
So
You think there might be some
companies started
corporate?
innovating,
Yeah.
and someone came up with an idea and said, "Wow, I can pull data
Mm-hmm.
fast." And also, I think part of the other maybe side of that was the speed of the internet catching up.
Right.
Your speed of velocity is always limited by your network, and so when you can literally now move at the speed of light, and be able to pull data, that now becomes your only limit of how fast you can pull that data.
Right. So there's a corporate benefit also to the speed of the real time data. I mean, just look at Amazon, right? I mean, they can in real time basically as you're browsing things figure out and come up with other suggestions based on past history, your current
Yep,
browsing history, what have you been looking at on the website, and do this complex analysis that I'm sure they have some psychologists working on there too, being like these are the things that this person's going to be prone to buy. I mean, there's a whole multi-discipline science that goes into it other than just the real-time data, but you got to have that data and lots of it before you can get that output. You know what I mean?
absolutely, yeah,
Yeah.
and so I think, but with IT and these corporations in general, it's very specific data that they're looking to pull. Some are pulling lots, like everything
Yeah.
that they can get, because you never know what data is going to be important until it is.
Mm-hmm.
And there's other technologies that are less than real time. Technologies like Splunk, they tend to store massive amounts of data, as much as you can
Yeah.
capture and pull, and then you go back after the fact, and you use other types of technologies, anything as simple as Excel, to even like something like Tableau, to pivot the data into different reports,
Right. Right.
and try to correlate, right? And that's more of like a data scientist type thing. But
Mm-hmm.
when you have something very specific in mind that you want to find, the data I'm talking about, that's where it becomes a little bit more relevant, because it's a much more lighter weight, right? In order to move in real time, the data has to be small, so it has to
Right.
be less than, I guess in a web coder's terms, a packet, right? So
Okay.
if you can just pull a packet of data, you can pull that in real time. If you
you
have to
you want like
pull,
a small subset of data
yep,
that's easy to analyze and pull as opposed to a giant set of metadata that you're going to have to pivot on and do calculations on. You want that quick identifiable information, right?
absolutely. So,
Yeah,
so when it
yeah.
comes to like a vote is a quick checkbox, right?
Right.
When it comes to, did someone pass away from COVID and these are the supporting symptoms, that's five checkboxes. These are all
Right.
things that are easily kept within 4K of data. So,
Okay.
um, so when it comes to, again, then going back to the privacy concerns, right?
Yeah.
Again, it's targeted data and knowing and understanding what that vendor could do, what they're capable of, or
Mm-hmm.
what are they actually doing. So I think when it comes to a voting system or a tracking system of these types of things, the voting system, obviously that can be done from any general population's phone, right, or
Mm-hmm.
device. The goal of that is that it is secure. It's managed by a trusted entity,
Uh-huh.
whether that is a company that is hired by the government or the government themselves. I actually kind of have a theory that if we go down that voting path, it should almost be run by the Secret Service. A lot of people don't think of the Secret Service as that type of agency, but they actually are. They have almost more of a deeper cybersecurity department
Yeah.
than the NSA does.
Yeah,
A
a lot
lot
of
of
people
the
don't know that their job's not just to protect the president or political people. Their original job was counterfeit, um, uh, stopping counterfeit bills, larceny, stuff like that. That's actually how they started. I don't know exactly how it turned into presidential detail and stuff like that, but their real history is in counterfeit
right.
operations. Yeah,
Yeah, and so a lot of when I used to work in corporate IT, I mean, a lot of the tips that we got that hey, there's something going on, it actually came from Secret Service.
oh wow, okay.
And I was really surprised, and it just obviously I don't think it's any kind of secret information by any means, but when my director of security came to me and said, "Hey, I got this tip," and I'm like, "Where did that come from?" And it wasn't a three-letter agency, and actually there's a Secret Service agent or a Secret Service office and somewhere in Seattle, and so.
Right, right.
Again, I was just kind of surprised. Oh, tell me a little bit more about that. How does that actually work?
Yeah.
So, anyways, but back to the privacy stuff. I think if it's done correctly, obviously everything has to be around trust, trust of the people, and they're it's just I want to make sure that we understand. It's not that it's impossible to only pull targeted data. we
Right, right.
I think we can do it, and we just have to come up with a way that is acceptable to everybody.
Right.
And maybe that just means that if somebody doesn't trust the system, so to speak, I've actually thought about this a little bit further than just the data, because a lot of people pose the challenge of, well, not everybody can afford a smartphone. Well, okay, that's true, but
Right.
we have quite literally millions of devices from Apple and Google, where Verizon collects these devices and collects them for recycling, and they're anywhere from 4 to 5 years old. They've been turned in by individuals such as myself, wipe clean their data wise, right?
Yeah.
We could the government could subsidize those, purchase those, and hand those out
That's true.
for at a very low cost to the general public. So if you didn't feel comfortable installing that application on your personal device, you could go get a free device from the government. It might be a 5-year-old iPhone
Mhm.
or iPod, but you could install the app there and use that as a voting device.
Right, because it only has one function at that point. So,
Yep.
yeah. So could you explain to people like what the concept of metadata is that you hear in the news all the time versus what you're talking about, which is the targeted information? Because I think a lot of people don't understand what the metadata is, and you hear it in the news a lot. You'll hear about Facebook, for example, gathering all this metadata, or Google all this metadata, and it's obvious that they're doing it because things are so targeted towards you. And sometimes it's eerily targeted where you're like, I've never mentioned that before, like on Facebook or something, but somehow it knows that that's something that would appeal to me, or that's something I would buy. So I know that places like Facebook and a lot of these sites are pulling insane amounts of data, and it's not just small targeted stuff. It's like what you were talking about with a data scientist is going to pivot this information and do analysis on it and stuff. And I know that that's been a concern of people, and because these free services like Facebook, if you're not paying for it, you're the product. So,
Absolutely.
and I
Absolutely.
don't think people realize that. That's how that they target all their ads. That's how they generate their revenue, and that's how they become these billion-dollar companies, is selling you.
Yep.
Yeah,
So when it comes to targeted data versus like just pulling all the metadata, right?
yeah,
Obviously, Facebook, Google, your phone, and Alexa in general, these devices are always listening, whether people realize it or not.
yeah,
I think even like falsely so, like there's a new iPhone feature of the last iOS release where it's supposed to put a little green dot or red dot
yeah, yeah.
if the speaker's on. However, I believe it's actually always listening. I actually what you just described,
Yep.
I had not even looked up table saws in the last couple of days or even actually thought it out loud. I had been in the presence of a table saw.
Yes.
Okay. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden I get an ad today saying, "Hey, would you, this on Facebook Marketplace is available in your
Right.
area." And so yeah, I absolutely believe that there is something potentially listening,
Yeah.
or targeting and pulling all the data surrounding you, parsing that somewhere, And you gotta imagine like the crunching that goes on.
Yeah.
These are have to be super computers that the governments wish that they had years ago, right? And so there's just all kinds of things. Your devices all around you collect all kinds of things.
Yeah.
What we're talking about when we talk about targeted data, right? If you kind of think of maybe like a survey monkey, you log into survey monkey to answer a questionnaire, you check some boxes, and that is the only thing that they get from you at that point in time.
Right.
Now when it comes to voting though, to make it a little bit more secure to get around fraud, right? Then there starts to become a little bit more that we want to know. So we
Uh-huh.
want to know. I kind of started thinking about things that we would want to know to make sure that people aren't trying to cheat the system, that we're not
Right.
being hacked. And when you make it tough enough, it makes it very hard. You might get one or two fraudulent type votes, but to do it at scale, at the
Hmm.
scale where you could overturn an election, becomes very hard.
Right.
So where the idea that kind of popped in my brain today, you can, well, when people are traveling today, today you can check into the country with a passport app. Okay, you can literally
Hmm.
bypass going through customs if you're a U.S. citizen. You can take a selfie, you can take a picture of your driver's license, a picture of your passport, and you can bypass the entire 3 hour line to go talk to a
Right.
customs agent. You walk up, you show the customs agent your QR code, he scans it, and away you go.
Right.
So I thought of that. It's like if it's secure enough to check into the country, it's got to be secure enough to do a vote,
Right. Right.
right?
Right.
So if we take it to the level of, and a lot of people are kind of really against, this is where it gets a little bit controversial, right? Any kind of ID for voting.
I was
But
gonna
if we
bring
did
that up.
require it, what's that?
I was gonna bring up the voter ID thing because
Yep.
as soon as you mentioned passport, I'm like, that's a government issued ID, and there's a lot of controversy around voter IDs and who would actually have access to them and kind of excluding groups of people because they don't have voter IDs,
Right.
disenfranchising people. So, but I'm sure that if we thought about it, we could probably come up with a solution for it. And I'm
We
assuming
have
you
a
have an idea.
multitude of
Yeah,
ways to prove who someone is or is not,
yeah,
and to make their vote unique enough. So, the things that make you unique outside of your ID is also your facial image, your selfie.
right.
And then from there, you start looking at the other. This is where it does get a little bit more metadata-ish in a
Uh
vote,
huh.
right? You're looking at the IP address of the device,
Okay.
and you're also looking at the metadata of the photos that they submit. If you were to take a selfie, there's metadata attached to that to include the GPS coordinates of the selfie and the IP address of where it was taken and so on and so forth. So, and the date and time. That's
Right.
actually also very important, right? Because what you don't want is somebody going out and downloading a bunch of selfies because people take selfies and post them on Instagram all the time. You
Right.
don't want a bad actor or a other country who wants to meddle and interfere to go out and download millions of selfies and then submit those as votes and try to fraud the system.
Right.
So, because actually when you do that, it actually strips all the metadata out, so you can start seeing a fraudulent selfie if there's no metadata attached. And
So
so essentially, this is how there might be little bits of information that are needed to prove those types of things, and then from there you can, as people submit these selfies or these images, you can then reverse image search them in the database to make sure that there's not duplicates.
okay, I was
So
going to
that
ask about that the check on that. So the concept that you're going for here is you would take a selfie. Your face itself is a bunch of data points as far as
yep,
the metadata is concerned, and then you would have location, time, and all this other information as a unique ID. Um, but where would the check happen? Because I know that there's websites out there where you can generate a fake face, and they are really good. I think
right,
it's called like thispersondoesnotexist.com, and the AI will randomly generate a face, and it's like this person doesn't really exist. Like,
right.
and it's really really good.
And that's crazy. And you can actually hack photos as well to manipulate the metadata
Yeah.
of like date and time taken and GPS location and all that. So that is also out there. But then then you start like, okay, how do we like, again, going back to reverse searching it? But if you have an AI that can auto generate a bunch of fake faces,
Right.
I think the harder work at that point then becomes how do you correlate those fake selfies to whatever other unique identification you have, whether that be a social security number or some other form or way to identify you, even your voter number. right?
Right.
If because your voter number has to be unique.
Okay.
Whether people realize it or not, that's on your ballot when you vote
Okay.
today, and that's how they scantron and register that to you.
I don't think people even realize they have a voter ID number.
Right.
You
I
know?
mean, when
Yeah.
you get because you register to vote, you get a voter card, a voter
Yeah.
ID card, right? So,
Yeah.
um, one way or another, you are tagged as
Yeah.
unique in the system.
Okay, so that's interesting because that means that you're already a unique individual in a government system somewhere. So if you have other data points that can add to the uniqueness of it and be used as cross checks, then maybe we do eliminate the voter ID issue.
Right.
Is that kind of what you're
There's
getting at there?
multitudes of ways.
Yeah.
And with that though, I think then the question becomes who runs it? Is it a state run thing or is it a nationally run thing?
Right.
Um, the where it becomes a little bit more difficult is that the truth about people being able to vote in multiple states this last year, there was a huge migration of people that moved from California to Nevada and Texas
Yeah.
and New Mexico and Arizona this last year, and I'm not going to say that there was huge waves of voter fraud, but I'm thinking there might have been one or two people that had two pamphlets, one from the county that they came from and the one from the
Right.
county that they moved to, and that there was no communication between those two counties that the voter had moved, and that
So
people were able to mail in both.
yeah. My understanding is, I'm not a political science major or anything, but my understanding is that the the voting and the elections are on a county level. It's up to the counties or at most the states to determine how they're going to tally those votes. It's not a federal system; it's a state
Right.
system. Um, and I don't think people realize that. That's just the way it's built into the. I think it's the Constitution. Somewhere in there is where they explain how the voting's supposed to happen on a county, but county by county level. That's why when you're watching the news and every county is broken up, and that's why
Yep.
stuff like gerrymandering comes into play and stuff like that because it's all county based. It's not federal or state based at all. Um, so as far as adoption of something like this, I think you might run into an issue with states' rights issues, and that's probably another part of the whole controversy for this kind of thing. And I don't know if there's a way to navigate this and let the states keep their sovereignty of their voting system, but have the federal government have a system that's like a check system, basically. It's not the one making the decision, but it's the authoritative like security measure, I guess. I'm not sure how that would
Right.
be navigated.
No. So it's actually interesting when I started doing a little bit of research recently. I know that in Washington State we don't have any electronic voting, as far as I know, but there are 33 states apparently that do have a form of electronic voting.
Okay. You're talking about
And
like
and
Diebold
so
machines and stuff like that?
no, this is actually 100% remote voting. It's
Oh,
built
wow.
for people that are deployed overseas, and it's their actual absentee type voting system. It's
Okay.
less than like 2 or 3% of their voters, but they do have an electronic voting system that where
Okay.
people log into a website to submit their votes. And it is a hard one to navigate with not just the laws of you're not just dealing with 50 state laws. You're potentially dealing with all the counties of each of
Yeah.
those states. Washington State has what 72? Am I thinking that correctly? 72
Uh,
counties,
I don't think it's that
or
much.
is
I
it
don't think it's that
36
many.
counties?
I think it's 30 something.
Um, yeah, no, I think it's 36, and I was thinking 72 because I had to memorize the counties and the capitals of each county,
Oh,
or
yeah, yeah.
or the
Oh,
seat, some of that nature. But so anyways, I mean there's quite a few just in
yeah.
Washington State. So you expand that out times 50, and now you're dealing with all these different county laws
Yep.
where they're tracking, right? And to get all those systems intertangled, so to speak, or where they're talking to each other, where they can detect if you have a particular individual that has registered in multiple counties,
Hmm.
and to kind of head that off. So but there is other benefits to electronic real-time voting. Like for example, if let's say you voted early and you get to that last debate and the candidate that you voted for just said that one thing that kind of pushed you over the edge, you can go back and change your vote. I think you should be able to go back and execute a vote change up to a certain
Yeah.
point.
This is an interesting topic because I think that was that was really highlighted during this pandemic because the debates got. I mean, regardless of what side you fell on, doesn't really matter. But the debates, schedule wise, didn't one of them didn't happen. They were delayed, if I remember correctly, and it was just a
Yep.
mess. Like, but they were because of the pandemic. Everybody's like, vote early because we might not be able to get to the polls. So make sure you have your vote in. But a huge majority of people early voted way before the debates.
Right.
And then the debates happened, and I heard multiple people saying, "I wish I could change my vote." Like,
Yep.
um, because something got said during the debate where it was like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, no, I don't want it. No, I don't want anything to do with that." You know what I mean?
Or even
Um,
just things hitting the media. I
yeah,
heard
yeah, exactly. The news
several
cycles
things.
move so
Yeah.
fast. So yeah, yeah. So I mean, the solution to that is either there's one day where you got to vote, and that's the only day. And I think and it would be like the last like day of the voting cycle, basically. What would that be?
Right.
November? No, no, not November. Yeah, November. What, 5th or something like that? I can't
It's
remember.
fifth or sixth. I think it
Something
just
like
depends
that.
on. It's always a
So
Thursday, right?
yeah, but the only way that would happen is we would literally have to have a national holiday, which I'm okay with, but a national holiday where people don't have to go to work because it's about voting. But other
Right.
than that, you're just going to have people doing mail-ins or early votings because people have lives. But then something might happen in the news cycle, like you said, or in that debate where you're like, oh man, I really wish I could change this because now I've changed my mind, you know. And they're like, nope, all right, we already got you. Sorry. Sucks to be you.
Well, one of the things I was actually, so if you go and look up the history of voting, and I don't know what year this changed. I need to go back and reread the article, but I was actually very surprised that early voting, and we're talking like pre-19, yeah, I think it was like the early 1900s when this finally changed to ballot voting.
Uh huh.
It was all yays and nays. You had to
Yeah.
show up and say yay or nay to
Uh
a
huh.
candidate, and or even other initiatives going on in your area,
Hmm.
and like that's the epitome of like in-person voting where you actually have to
Yeah.
sit there and raise your hand and everybody gets to see. And the whole ballot thing was actually more about moving to secret voting or not, so that you didn't have to share who you did or did not vote for.
Right. That way you
um,
don't cause public issues or something because people get really
yep.
heated about that. No, they always have. They always have. Even pre-America, voting when in countries that had like any kind of voting, people got very passionate about their particular side. I mean,
Right. And there was a part of me that was like, we should actually take it to the standard of, in order for our government to be able to execute on certain things, that it actually should be put to a vote of the people. But
mm,
then I kind of thought a little bit better of that because if you see the battles that happen now, if you imagine if it was put to the people as to whether or not we spend 1.9 trillion dollars,
right.
um, that
Yeah.
we'd never be getting anywhere. So that's where obviously the senators and the congressmen. It's really better to have the representatives vote on that. However, I do
Mm,
think maybe on particular things, similar Washington State, anytime a certain law gets passed, you'll circle back around as to this was not put to a vote of the people.
yeah.
Do you vote yes or no on this?
Yeah.
I think there is certain things that when our federal government decides to spend multitudes upon multitudes of money, at a minimum, maybe we it's maybe almost more of like electoral college. I think a lot of our representatives don't actually know where their people stand.
No.
Like they have no way of actually knowing what the majority stance is on something, and they're really voting for us in favor of what their party wants them to vote
Yes.
for. So I think if you go up and you as a senator or congressman make a vote and you had over 80% of the people that you represent voting saying that they want you to vote the other way, then it becomes very apparent whether or not you're actually what you're doing. I guess the
Yeah.
accountability there.
Because at that point you're not really being representative like you're supposed to be. I mean, that's the whole idea of having these representatives, the congressional and senators, is that they are representative of the people. But it seems like, especially these days, they're more representative of the parties.
Right.
So it's a really weird place to be in because, especially if you fall somewhere in the middle politically, you're like, well, I'm just being ignored completely. Like,
Right.
so
Absolutely. And then there's the concept of polling, right? And what the heck is polling? We hear it on the news and the media all the time, and they're like, well, according to the polls,
yeah,
well,
yeah,
you know, so and so has the lead by so many points. How the heck do you know that? How many people did you actually ask or interview or
Yeah,
look at?
yeah.
And there's no statistics that they present behind it, because I
Hmm.
think you'll find that they actually talk to like 200 or maybe 1,000 people,
Yeah.
and it's not very a strong representative of actually where things might stand at all. Something like this, even just being able to poll people, allow people to submit their passive vote, them knowing that this
Hmm.
doesn't make a difference, but at least you're stating your opinion.
Right,
Uh,
right.
that to regards of what you want your representatives to think about or know about. Obviously, it starts bringing in an overwhelming amount of data
Hmm.
potentially, but at least just the yes or no. Yes, I agree with that. No, I don't. I think is very important to what our representatives are missing right now.
Well, to yeah, on that topic, and to go back to like what you were talking about with like a voting app or something like that. The polling is an interesting topic because, like you said, where are they getting this data? What is the poll size, right?
Yep.
And I think the news cycle is 24/7 constant, especially during the political season, right? And I think that by them not being transparent with, where is this data coming from? What are the real numbers and stuff? They're actually, the news themselves is swaying elections through, because like once, what happens is somebody will be like, let's say it's Biden, for example. They'll be like, Biden is polling, 70%. I'm just making up numbers now. Like he's got
Yeah.
70% of the lead. There's going to be a lot of people that might vote for Biden, where they're like, well, he's going to win it anyways. I'm not even going to go show up, right?
Right.
Which is what happened to Hillary, like back in 2016. Basically, everybody thought she was a shoe in. Like, so I think a lot of people just didn't even show up because they're like it was a foregone conclusion, and I think the polling did that damage, like among other things. But like, if you thought your team was going to win, you might not put out as much effort if it's a for sure. You know what I mean?
Right.
Um, but the idea of the app and polling, I could see a system where, I mean, not everybody has to answer, but maybe there are these questionnaires that go out to a government app of some kind, you know, the like from your representative, where it's like, how do you feel about this issue? Yes or no, and that might give better information on how the people are actually feel about this, and might inform the representative government on how they should act,
Right.
or it's really interesting with the advent of technology. Like me and you are talking virtually right now. If there's a really controversial subject or something complicated that the representative is going to talk about, I don't understand why they don't like come to the people and actually do like a whiteboard explanation. Like, you know what I mean? Like, get up and tell me why this is a good thing or why it's a bad thing. Why are you going to vote this way, especially on something really complex? And you could, especially they could break it out and be like, let's say the 1.9 trillion. They could be like, this is why this is bad. This is why this is good, and they could actually explain the long-term consequences, local impact, stuff like that. We don't get any of that as far as
No.
as far as I'm aware of. It's just they voted yes or no, deal with it. You know what I mean? I'd like to know that they're at least putting in that effort to explain why they're going to vote one way or the other.
I think some of it is just complexities of the issues.
Oh yeah,
When you talk to people, let's use Affordable Health Care Act, for example, right? That was an 8,000 page bill.
right, right.
And when you talk to anybody that was pro Affordable Health Care Act, they list three things, right? They list pre-existing conditions,
Yep.
they list the ability for people up to the age of 26 to be on their parents' health care,
Uh huh.
and they talk about the removal of lifetime caps. Basically, most pre-Affordable Health Care Act, you had $1 million healthcare cap. That
Yeah.
once you reach that $1 million in insurance usage, you were no longer eligible with that plan.
Right.
They removed three things. However, the bill was 8,000 pages, and what all else got included with that bill? And
Exactly.
and so there's a couple different parts. One, yes, it is complex, and law is complex, and law
Hmm.
wording is even more complex. I
Yeah.
do believe that there needs to be almost like if you write an 8,000 page bill, you better have a layman's term
Yeah.
of a little bit more generality of what's in those 8,000 pages.
Right.
But I do believe that a lot of these things, the reason they're not taking the time to whiteboard them is they don't want to explain where the other opposing interests are going.
Right. Right.
When this last round, it actually there was a lot of the whole kind of identification of $10 million going to Afghanistan for gender studies, right? That actually wasn't part of the COVID Act, right? It was
Hmm.
actually just part of their annual spend budget. So a
It was
lot
part
of
of the
stuff
but. Yeah.
got
Yeah.
brought to
Yeah.
light as to where all that money actually goes. And originally the Healthcare Act was going, or not the Healthcare Act, the COVID Act was going to be attached to the general funding, but then they decided to split it back out because of all these other controversial things that started getting brought to light.
Hmm.
So a lot of people are like, oh, they wheeled in 8 or 10,000 pages of documents. Like, no, that's actually just our
That's
annual
our.
spend.
Yeah.
And if you really want to know where the money's going, that would be the one to look at.
Yeah.
And so anyways, but I think it's a multitude of things. I think it's the complexity, and I think it's also the things that there is a potential that they don't want us to know that's going on or
Yeah,
where
I think
the
it would be
money's going
helpful
to.
because, like, I don't know if people know this, but you can actually go onto the congressional website and look up any bill and where it's at and read the
Right.
document, and it's supporting like files. The problem is we're not lawyers, and those things are written, like you said, in very technical legal language, and I think that's for a reason. I mean, that's the way it's supposed to be, but I think for the general population and for like transparency, it'd be really nice to have a layman's explanation of those bills as well,
Yep.
or even just to pare them down a little bit. There's a lot of bills. I mean, there's a term, I think it's called pork bills, I think is what they're called, where they're like hiding stuff in there, and I think that if there's pork in a bill, it should just be thrown out automatically because you're confusing the issue. Like, go ahead,
Yeah.
make a separate bill for that, pass it itself. These writers, I think, is where people start to distrust the government, and you know
Like I think it's just fraught with it
yeah.
right now. I think any bill that's going through, the only way that they call it, compromise really, but it's they are throwing each other's interest and dare I say it, whoever they're taking money from for their campaign funding's interest into these bills.
Lobbyists and yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah,
And it's we're talking, billions of dollars changing
yeah,
hands in a bill.
yeah.
And it's really hard because we as the people should know where that money's going or why that money's being
Right,
spent that way.
right.
Some of it makes sense. A lot of it does not. And I think I learned recently that we subsidize the fishing industry to the tune of like something like $5 billion a
Hmm.
year or something like that. Why is all that money going to the fishing industry? What is the benefit? Is there a
Yeah.
benefit? Kind of thing.
I mean, and yeah, that maybe that's where the layman's explanation should come in. It's like, okay, you're asking for this subsidy. Can you explain to me in layman's terms why this is a good thing? And if you can
Right.
explain it well, I might be like, that's completely fine. I'm fine with this, you know. But right now it's just kind of there, and you're like, I don't understand why they're spending this money. And the majority of us are way too busy with our day-to-day activity to get deep into how subsidies work and how it might benefit this particular industry because that's industry specific. And just I think a quick layman's explanation to these bills as like an addendum would be huge for government transparency. And I mean, they're already writing 8,000 page bills. What's another 20 pages? Like, really? I mean, come on.
I mean, realistically, that should only be another 5 or 10
Yeah,
people sitting
exactly,
off to the
exactly. It should
side
only be like five,
translating
but
almost, right?
yeah.
That's a translation job. That's
Yeah,
a legal translator,
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
right?
exactly, exactly.
But the point that you hit though is like we're all busy.
Yeah.
And I think what we've actually started to see is that as people start to delve a little bit, people get very emotional, people get
Mm-hmm.
very divided. People like, and this is just through social media, right? As
Yeah.
people start to express their opinions and they see what other people think, and like people are unfriending each other, and now we have
Yeah.
cancel culture. My only concern about going down this path to the public is what does it do to the general population? Does it divide them further?
Yes.
Does it unite them together?
Right.
or do people's heads just start exploding because we as it is, our amount of data input that we have on the day to day right now is already through the roof. At
Yeah.
any given time, any one of us probably has, anywhere from 1 to 5 data feeds, if not more, sometimes as many as
Hmm.
10. And this could be anywhere the conversation is going on in your text messages, your
Yep.
Facebook messages, your Instagram, your email, your video feed, your TV,
Right.
the radio, whatever's going on around you. That is all the different data feeds that you are constantly taking in, and we are reaching what I believe is a human saturation point of how much data we can take in at once. And so if
Ye-
you add this very complex one, it has a potential to be a tipping point.
right. Especially since it's a charged topic potentially. So
Yep.
even more so. You just got to get Elon's Neuralink so you can take even more data in.
It's funny. I had actually went, and that's a whole nother rabbit hole, right? But like
Yeah.
many years ago, when I first started getting into texting and I was constantly on the go and I was driving an hour each way to work, and I was like, man, if I could just get to the point where I think it and it sends that text, or I think it and it sends that email, that would be the nirvana. And I kind of started thinking telepathy through technology,
Yeah.
right? And that's exactly what Elon is moving towards now
Right.
with his
Right.
Neuralink, right? Is just being able to move in that direction. And there's actually a movie in the late '90s. I cannot find this movie. It was on the Sci-Fi Channel, and the whole thing was about this entire civilization where they had that Neuralink. It looked
Uh huh.
like something sitting on the back of their brains. They had it put in when they were kids, and and they're all tuned into what's called the stream in the movie. Now, keep in mind this is late '90s. The internet was brand new, and there was no cell towers at the time like there are now. And these people were all jacked in, and he had 15-year-olds that were neuroscientists and things of that nature because they could learn so fast. And
Right. Right.
literally, hey, have you read that book? And like all of them, and then all of a sudden yeah, that was a great book. 15 seconds later,
Yeah.
literally data in real time, similar to what we were just talking about, right? And then there's this one guy, he got into an accident. He could no longer have the Neuralink, and he was considered handicapped.
Mm,
And he had to read. He was considered slow because he had to actually go read books.
physically read. Yeah.
Yep. And then all of a sudden, the something has started happening with the AI behind the stream. It started debilitizing people, and the guy that wasn't impacted starts having to take out all the stream towers, or what looks like
Uh.
cell phone towers, right? And then so he takes down this entire thing, destroys the AI system behind the stream, and now he's the most brilliant man in the world because nobody knows how to read. And he has to like literally start this whole thing all over again of teaching everyone from scratch how to read and how to get back to where
Okay.
they were when they
Okay.
don't have access to instantaneous data. But I can't remember what it was called, and I have yet to find that movie. But anyways, that's a side topic rabbit hole kind of thing.
Well, it's related to the whole data saturation thing and stuff, and you were talking about, you know, is this something that is going to unite people or make it more divisive, and it is unfortunate that people are becoming decisive and kind of like you know uh, pushing each other out basically,
Yep.
and because I feel like social media is playing a big part in that, and this like oversaturation of data, and people tend to like hunker down into their silo of thought basically. They identify with it so much that they don't want to hear anything else, right? And this whole decisiveness thing is part of the reason why I started this, was because um, there's always the concept of the 6 degrees of separation, and it's kind of this funny game that people play to get connected to Kevin Bacon somehow, right? But I was thinking about it, and I'm like, well, there's a lot of people I know that have varying thoughts and ideas and complexities, and they have really interesting hobbies, jobs, and passions, and I feel like those kind of things are the uniters for us. You know what I mean? Like we have way more in common, just the average person, than we have differences. Our differences are just like small, minute, like um, eccentricities of somebody, but at the end, everybody is an interesting person, and we're connected. So my thought was, if I could talk to people I know that are have these interesting ideas or hobbies and passions, and I could just kind of show how interconnected everybody is. Because even though we're connected by technology like Twitter and stuff, I don't feel like those are real connections. Like, you know what I mean? It's kind of like, oh, well, I know them online, you know.
Right.
But if I could talk to somebody, like I'm talking to you right now, and then you lead me to somebody else, I might not know them, but you've vouched for them, not just a virtual like connection. You know what I mean? There's a human connection there. So it was just a way to, it's, I'm hoping it's a way to show that just we're all in this together, basically. um,
And I applaud
and
it because it's like, what do we do with all this stuff going on in the world right now, right?
yeah, there's so many challenges going on right now in the world, and doesn't matter what your opinion on them is. Let's say like climate change or the voting or anything like that. I mean, people get really passionate about these topics, and they're all important, and they all have um, like subtlety to them. You know what I mean? But we all got to go through this together. So we better find the things that are common to us, and just kind of highlight that humanity, basically. Because right now there's a lot of, I guess, I don't know if I call it dehumanizing, but it's kind of like, you don't, let's say climate change, for example. Like, you might have a slightly different interpretation of what's going on, right? You're not even denying the fact that man-made climate change is a thing. You might just be like, well, there's also these like global cycles that we have to factor in and stuff too. And
Right.
somebody might just be like, I'm never listening to you again. Do you know what I
Yep.
mean? Because you're wrong, and you're like, well, let's talk about it, right? And I like to talk about things. I've told people before, um I'm a little too good at playing devil's advocate sometimes. Like, I kind of enjoy it. I will purposely take a position I don't subscribe to
Right.
and defend it, right? Because I want to see what the other person says. And I've had people get mad at me because they'll know me personally, and they're like, "But you don't believe that." I'm like, "That's not the point. You're not answering the question." Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? This is a question that somebody that does have that thought would ask, so you should have an answer for that. You know what I mean? And I think that that discussion is healthy, but I feel like a lot of people now are afraid of those discussions, or like you were saying, there's a saturation of information that we don't even we all know a lot about a lot of stuff, but at a shallow level. There's not
Yep.
a lot of depth of knowledge. There's a breadth of knowledge. So, and I'm guilty of that too. I know, like, I mean, I'm interviewing all these people because I have too many interests, but I only know depth on a few things. Everything else is kind of a shallow knowledge. So if I could talk to somebody like you, who, you're working with this, real time data stuff, I can go a little deeper. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So it's just a really interesting, like, um, byproduct of this show, and something that I was hoping would happen, but it's still interesting.
I think a lot of people are afraid to say I don't know too.
There's that too. Yeah, yeah,
They're afraid to they like for whatever reason, everyone has kind of reached a point where they've got to be the expert on that, or they don't want to sound stupid,
right,
so they'll
right,
they'll hold a position that they probably shouldn't,
yeah, yeah,
not be like, you know what, maybe I should go look into that a little bit more before
yeah,
I answer that question. Um,
yeah, yeah. Maybe that's part of the data saturation problem, though, is maybe there's a feeling that people have that they should know everything because we literally have all the knowledge of mankind in our pocket right now, like
right.
never before, you know. And maybe people feel like obligated that they should know all this information, but not really. You really shouldn't. Like, you can only take in so much, you
Yeah,
know.
and even if you do try to access quote unquote knowledge of man, it's um, sadly a lot of it is manipulated. What's going on in your pocket now?
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah.
It's
There's
being
that too.
guided a direction. The fact checkers are even being called to task now as to was that thing that you fact checked that you said was not true, but it actually was true.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
um, Wait, what?
yeah.
and so I mean, there's just you really have to sit down and do your research, and it's hard to say who's credible and who's not credible.
Right, right.
That makes it even harder nowadays. And if you call
Mm-hmm.
someone's someone's source that they said was credible not credible, and then they get offended all over again.
Right, right. Well, and
So
then
it's
we also have a problem with like with the sheer amount of data that there is right
yep.
now. I heard a statistic probably like a week or two ago that said that 90% of all data that we have that's ever been created was created in the last 2 years.
Wow.
90%. That's
I mean,
mind-boggling.
does that include books? I mean, like if we sit
Yes.
down and we go and look at a library, right? Like, because that's a lot. That means like that last 10% was the libraries of old, so to speak, right?
Well, I think the idea of, like they were saying data, so not actual
Okay,
knowledge, but data.
right.
So think about the sheer volume of data being uploaded to YouTube on a daily basis. It's more than anybody could ever watch in a lifetime, several
Right.
lifetimes. You know what I mean? But that's being uploaded every minute, every hour. I don't remember what the statistic was, but it was mind-boggling. It's like months worth of data is watchable data time frame wise is being uploaded every hour. You know what I mean?
The
Like,
the Silicon Valley show, right? Where the I think it was Gavin Newsom, the kind of the bad guy CEO, right? And he's like,
uh-huh.
you think it's funny now, but when we reach Datageddon, right? Because he's talking about how there's just not enough storage space to store
Oh
the
yeah.
world's data.
Yeah.
You know, he's not wrong in
No, he's not
in that
wrong.
kind of
There's
thing.
gonna be there has to be a maximum point. Like, I mean, people think about the cloud as like this magical thing that they upload to. That's just other people's computers somewhere else.
Exactly.
You know what I
Yep.
mean? Like, come on. That's gonna. I mean, we're gonna run out of space unless we have new technologies coming out that can hold more in smaller form factors. Basically, you know.
The moon's going to become a data center. It's going to, cold
That sounds like a
storage.
sci-fi plot. You know, the moon is a data center, and then somebody blows it up or something, and like we lose all the data. Um, Huh. I'm gonna trademark that right now, by the way.
See, seeing a
Um,
single point of failure. Single point of failure. The moon.
well, this is interesting you bring that up because I was talking to somebody I know who is an Amazon engineer, and I was giving an example. I think something happened in the news or something like that. I can't remember now. Something failed. And I think it might have been something structural, right? Like a structural engineering issue. And this Amazon engineer and me were both computer scientists, and we were like, are we the only industry that thinks of single points of failure? Because like basically this structural issue was one point of failure like that failed, and then they're like, we got to shut the whole thing down. Oh, I
Right.
remember what it was: the Suez Canal. That's what it was.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and we were like, how that this thing has been around forever. The Suez Canal. I mean, it's I don't know, a couple hundred years old. I don't remember exactly when it was built. I want to say like
Yeah.
14 something, right? Don't quote me on that. But um, uh, how do they not have fail safes in there? How is that a single point of failure to the global economy? Like people had to go all the way back down across the Cape of Good Hope in Africa and go the old way, like they're Magellan or something, you know? And I'm like, are you serious? One boat can break the whole global economy for what was it, a week or something like that?
Yeah.
You know? And so we were talking about single points of failure, and we were like, well, why is it? Are we just because we're computer scientists, we think about multiple points of failure? Like, why hasn't this been addressed? You know? And I think that might kind of play into the what you were talking about with the voting stuff too. How do we avoid these points of failure? You know,
Right.
like
Yeah, the Suez Canal. I mean, like, I think that one's just it was so old, and like it was always going back to this is the way we've always done it
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
thing, and I it never had an issue. So a lot of times people don't think of an issue like that or a single point of failure like that until it is an issue,
I
unfortunately. And and I don't be surprised the next 10 or 15 years they start digging a side trench or widening that guy or
exactly.
making
Yeah,
it
yeah.
so that it can't be a single point of failure like that.
I mean, I think the only time that it's failed before was not due to a boat mishap. It was more political or like geopolitics, basically, where it got
Right.
shut down. And like maybe during like I think it might have been a war or something like that. There's been a couple times I think where it's been shut down, but not shut down due to mechanical failure or the shipping lane failure. It was more political,
Right.
kind
No,
of
and,
thing.
and and then of course then the economies at scale come in and like no that will open back up.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm kind of surprised there wasn't more of that with this, right? I mean, that's it's just a boat. Figure out how to get it out.
Yeah. Like aren't we like in the like 2021? We can't figure out how to move this boat like
Right. You should have like a super lift. He just comes in and hovers
yeah.
down and turns
Yeah.
that guy back.
I don't know if you ever saw, if you saw the picture, but they had a picture like it kind of turned into a meme, and it's like a small backhoe trying to push it back into the water, like, and it's this massive,
Yeah, I've seen
cargo
that
ship,
one.
and I'm like, well, I don't think that's gonna do anything, buddy.
Yep.
So the going back to the real time data,
Yep.
how do you think that that either helped or hindered during the COVID epidemic or pandemic, and what do you think the future holds for that? Like, if we were to have another one
Uh,
of these, or I mean, because Bill Gates is always talking about the next one is going to be really, is potentially really bad. I mean, to be honest, this has been bad, but we got off easy. Like, as far as like,
right.
I mean, it could have been much, much worse. And I think we need to be real time data might help us address these issues faster. You know what I mean? So if you want to
Absolutely.
speak
So
to
so one
that,
of the
yeah.
things that the early conversations, I guess it wasn't early, it was mid pandemic, and I got into a conversation with somebody, and we were kind of talking about how the hospitals were counting deaths,
Mm-hmm.
and they weren't necessarily. I think one of the big ones where you kind of saw that our media go into a state of shock for a minute was when the CDC came out and said that what was something like 92% of the deaths had contributing factors,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
where they had two or more contributing factors, right?
Yeah.
They were diabetic, or they already had emphysema or something else that made
Right.
them very susceptible.
Yeah.
But they hadn't been reporting on that, and actually they quickly dropped it back off a week later, where they just stopped talking about that. They just focused in on the number of deaths. So we started talking. I got into this conversation with this individual about, um, you know, looking back, we have had other pandemics that we just didn't talk about. If you look
Mm-hmm.
back in late 2018, early 2019, there was a TB pandemic that killed 1.5 million people globally, or excuse me, TD. Like, but no, nobody talked about it. It wasn't in the
Uh-huh.
media. It didn't go anywhere. We weren't asked to mask up. Tuberculosis spreads very fast
Yes.
through the air,
Yeah. It's
and,
also a
and so
respiratory disease. Yeah.
yep, and it wasn't talked about. No, again, nobody knew about it. There's other ones out there that are 10 times as scary as COVID.
Yeah.
You watch any kind of pandemic documentary, they talk about certain bird flus in China that has a 60% kill ratio.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's scary. Something like that breaks loose, shakes free into the world. That's a bad year.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when we started talking about how the hospitals were reporting, and people were trying to compare the what was called the excess deaths,
Mm-hmm.
and how we actually may or may not have had actually any extra excess deaths,
Yeah. I
because
heard about that.
people are staying home, people aren't dying from the flu, all
Yeah.
these other reasons where people would normally be being killed essentially
Yeah.
were no longer happening, because they're all hunkered down in their
Yep.
houses, and then people are getting hit by COVID. But what the comment that came out was, well, it actually takes us 2 years to know who died of what. And I'm like, well, wait, they're reporting live on the news right now
Yeah.
that this many people died today from COVID. So if
Yeah.
that statement is true, then how do we know what they just reported on the news is real? And he's like, well, that's really just an estimate. And I'm like, so how can they report that as factual, actual data?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, they're just taking the consensus. The hospitals are kind of, so it actually made me think, like, I would actually really almost enjoy going and trying to find out how the hospitals report in every day how many people passed away from what.
Yeah.
Um,
That's yeah.
so you don't see that part. You don't see the reporting data. And one of my another individual that is actually a close friend is the county coroner, or count deputy coroner, and it's kind of like, how does that data get reported? And
Yeah.
he's like, well, there's only four types of death that get reported on a death certificate. So he's like, I don't know how they're reporting how
That's
they actually
interesting.
passed away. So when you start looking at that type of data, how does that happen? And then of course, you get into the conversation of there was a lot of talk about hospitals getting any kind of extra funding if they reported a COVID death.
Yeah, yeah.
And some people said it was $7. Other people said it was a significant amount of money that they were actually getting from the COVID relief bill if they reported the death as COVID, which then is a whole nother healthcare topic and conversation as to how kind of corrupt our healthcare system has started to
Uh,
become, because they will find a way. If someone dangles a carrot and says if you report it as a COVID death, you get $14,000. Well, then yeah, every death's going to be a COVID death. That's a lot of money. So that's where it kind of starts to become weird, so to
yeah.
speak. And I kind of had this idea is like, he he challenged me, not fully knowing or understanding what I do. He said, "You don't understand real time data." I'm like, really? And so actually, I do know and understand real time data, and that actual thing, even at the scale of millions of computers across the United States and across the world, would be very easy to track, if as long as you kept the data small. Again,
Mm,
keeping data points small, you would be able to very easily track what was a COVID death and what was not, and what could be marked as flagged for review as to whether or not we should look into whether or not it was an actual COVID death
right,
or
right.
had some other conditions to it. And it just kind of made me realize that that's a whole nother element as to understanding death in our society, and being able to track these. And the list goes on and on of the other things you could track.
Yeah.
Deaths, violent acts, um, and it goes into like law enforcement. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
law enforcement. If you go to the FBI, and this actually sparked me recently as well, I wanted to know. It was around police brutality cases,
Uh-huh.
and actually when they started reporting racial facts around that. If you go to the data points in the FBI, they are 2 years old. They are 2 years behind in getting actual factual data, and they even state straight on it that not all agencies report,
Mm,
and that the data has a potential to be, inaccurate or not 100% accurate, just due to of how data is reported up in the system. Um,
so it
so
sounds like, yeah, it sounds like the a big issue might be the initial data collection. I guess I never really thought about this. You see those statistics on the news. My assumption would be that those are being collected from the hospital in real time somehow, but
right.
that doesn't sound like it's the case, especially when, like you were saying, the deputy coroner is like, well, there's only like four checkboxes for cause of death. And as far as I don't know, like there's so many different hospital like organizations. You have like group health, Franciscan, all these like they're insulated. Healthcare systems basically. I mean, they share data with each other to a limited point, like where you're like let's say you have to see a specialist, they're going to transfer your files over, right?
Right.
But they're all self-contained data, like, you know what I mean?
And the HIPAA laws themselves actually make it very hard to exchange that type of data. You can't.
Right, right.
There's no. It's not like, so like, let's use the Iraq War for example. There was a website where you could go look up any name of every soldier that passed away and what
Uh-huh.
they died from. You can't do that with COVID. You can't
Right,
go and look up a name of who, like, for example, I recently discovered that my neighbor passed away
oh
from
wow.
COVID, and it was not published anywhere. Like, it
Right.
wasn't actually, he didn't have an obituary. I
Hmm.
had to kind of dig a little bit. And it was really weird that there was just nothing
Huh.
that, but inversely, it wasn't because of HIPAA, and because it actually, when someone passes away from something, it shouldn't be public.
Yeah.
But in terms of like a pandemic, you almost kind of want to know, right? You
Yeah.
kind of want to know, like, there should be almost like a registry somewhere of, okay, this many people passed away. Can we see the list of names?
Right.
Is
And
that number real?
yeah.
Is that name real? Can I go and look that up to actually see the registry of where someone passed away from it?
Right, right. And I don't know if, like, I don't think there is anything like that. So I'd be really interested in talking to somebody who works in, say, public health or something like that, about how do you guys collect this data? How is that created? Because, for you and for myself, both being, IT computer people, it's all about the data and where did that data come from and how good is
Right.
that data? So I mean, if is what we're seeing on the news estimates? I mean, they might be accurate estimates, but how did you come to those? Because those estimates have to be based on data, basically. You
Right.
know, data
So
and
it had to
models.
come from
You know, it
somewhere,
has to come from
right?
somewhere. So I'd be really fascinated to
And
figure out where it came from.
when we're talking about, what they're talking is now 500,000 Americans have passed away from this. It, it's hard because it should or it shouldn't be public data. Is it our business to
Right.
know? But it's our business to know when the accountability comes into question. Did that many people actually pass away from COVID? Did that many
Yeah.
people actually pass away, period? I think some of the other data points are weird when they talk about hospitals being overrun. You go to the hospital right now and it is dead silent at a lot of
Mm.
hospitals. It's really eerie. You don't hear about very many hospitals actually being overrun, but you talk to a lot of healthcare professionals and they're absolutely scared of it. Or some, I've actually only met one individual that said the hospitals were overrun, and it was mostly because they pointed at it was a travel nurse that had gone to New York, and they said it was mostly due to the way the hospital was actually being run, not
Okay.
necessarily due to COVID. Um, so it's kind of weird. When you hear that the hospitals are being overrun, you go to the hospital for a surgery or something else, and like there's nobody
Yeah. Yeah.
there. So,
So how as a data I guess I call you a data specialist. How how can we make sure that the data is correct, like
mm,
without I guess infringing on people's like privacy or certain concerns like that? I feel like that's a really tough thing to crack. Like
that's gonna be one that like it would take a little bit more thinking or thought process around,
mm,
right? Because the once you start opening up, I guess, Pandora's box of somebody's personal health, um, it's you almost want to know a little bit more. Like
yeah.
what were the contributing factors? Did that
Hmm.
person smoke for 40 years? Once you do that, then their health insurance company might come back and say, well, we're not going to cover their death because
Right, right,
they,
right.
things of that nature. So it is really just kind of the complexities of it are a little bit weird, right?
Yeah.
And to know the other potential contributing factors gets complex because there's just so many of them. It could be
Hmm.
anything from cancer to smoking to some other just general health thing.
Yeah.
But then trying to then determine, did they pass away from COVID or did they pass away from the other condition, right?
Hmm.
You hear stories of people getting into a car accident. They tested positive for COVID, but they died from the car accident, but they count them as a COVID death.
Hmm.
Things like that, that's okay. How do you go back and decipher that, and how do you prove or disprove it? Um,
I think that
so
could
there's just
be. Yeah. I was just gonna say that seems like it'd be a complicated thing to separate the somebody being positive for COVID and having something else going on as which is the actual cause of death, because even the car accident example, unless it's really obvious that the accident like is the cause of the death, like let's say they got crushed or something like that, right? Like
yep,
there's like internal organ damage, right? um it could almost be argued that COVID is the killer if let's say they survive the initial impact, um and then they're in the hospital and then they pass away from their injuries. COVID might have been limiting their oxygen saturation, which may have added
yep.
on to the difficulty in treating them in recovering, so which actually killed them. I don't know if you could separate those two.
Right. And
You know what I mean?
and it's almost with our technology today, it's almost impossible at
Yeah,
that point.
yeah,
It's a contributing factor, not
right.
and so that's where it's super difficult to lay it out. And then you think people get emotional about politics. Obviously, you get tie it to a death
Or
or anything
healthcare
of
in
that
general.
nature.
You
Yep.
know, yeah, yeah.
It becomes very sensitive. So it's super hard, but I feel like there's a need. I feel like there's maybe not necessarily to try to cram it in around this round, right? But I think we can do better
Yeah.
in our world with these types of things, and it made me realize that like there's just so many different theories. People throw a theory at me like, well, could this be used as a control mechanism? And the answer is I don't know because I don't have the data.
Right.
If when you really stop and think about the core, a lot of people have a lot of different theories as to what this actually is or what it was. It continues to be a thing. We're on the I work a lot with people in Canada right now, and Ontario is going back into lockdown because their cases started going back up.
Right, right, right.
And there's some people that are thinking that King County might go back into lockdown out here in Washington,
Yeah.
and or back to phase two anyway. So we're
Yeah.
taking steps backwards in phases, and it's worrisome to me because and even though people are vaccinated, they're being told that they have to still wear masks. And
Hmm.
and again, it's like where's the data coming from? Why?
I think I don't want to cause too much controversy with the masks and stuff. I think it's a good idea to wear
Right,
masks. But I do find I'm a little concerned that the CDC may have, for lack of a better term, shot themselves in the foot on the public trust because initially we were told not to wear masks, right? They
right,
didn't do anything. And then a little while later, it was like, you have to wear a mask. That's the best thing to do. And it's like, well, why? This goes back to the data. Why did you tell us not to wear masks before, but now you're telling us to do it? What in the data has changed, right? And they weren't very clear
right,
about that. And if anything, it kind of turned out, if I remember correctly, they were like, we were the data they were concerned about was, is there going to be enough masks for public health officials, for the
right.
hospitals? So they kind of lied to everybody in a way. And
They
I
did.
think that
Yep.
immediately hurt the trust, and that's unfortunate because in something like this, we really need to have their trust, and they need to be very clear with their data points and why they're doing the actions that they're doing. And I think that if like people like the governors and people like that are doing the lockdowns were very, very clear about what the data is and why they're doing these and why that will control the spread, I think it would be more accepted. I think there's a lot of um, conflicting things like why. So for example, this is something that gets brought up a lot. Why is the little mom and pop shop have to be shut down but Target can stay open,
Right,
right? Why wouldn't Target, like the way they're explaining it, wouldn't Target be the bigger vector for contamination as opposed to a store that maybe only has like 5 people in it at a time as opposed to 100, 150, even at 25% capacity? You know what I mean? One of those seems like a bigger source of transmission to me anyways, just because you have
right.
more variables, you have more people. So I feel like this goes back to the data again. If they were clear with the data, where they're getting it and why they're making those decisions based on that data, I think that there'd be a lot more trust that people have. But I'm afraid that the damage might have already been done, and that really worries me for future issues. If we do have another one of these, right away, I think people might be like, "Well, last time they lied to us in the beginning, right?"
Yep.
This is gonna be the thought process, not my thought process, but the thought process of some people is going to be, they lied to us in the beginning the first time. Why would I listen to them now? And then we could have an issue where there is a run on masks, and now we have no healthcare workers with masks, and you know what I mean. And I just see like a lot of potential issues that could have been fixed by clear clear data and clear messaging like early on.
Yeah, I mean, now that said, I think there's a couple differentiating factors. One of which this one wasn't. I mean, it had a potential to be a little bit more deadlier, but
Oh yeah,
it's the it wasn't 60%, right?
right,
If
right.
you all of a sudden see a wave of like, well, the first city in China lost 20% of the population,
Yeah, yeah.
people are going to take that a little bit more serious than when the numbers are 3%.
Uh huh.
And so that it becomes a lot more scary, like the movie Contagion, right?
Yeah,
That's a scary pandemic
yeah,
where
yeah,
every town had a mass grave, and people are laid out, and
yeah.
everybody knew somebody that got sick and that didn't make it. We haven't seen anything like that in our lifetime just yet.
Thank goodness.
Even now, like this, the swine flu of 1918, right? We still haven't seen something quite to that level just yet.
Right, right.
And that one was also pretty nasty.
Yeah,
So I guess we'll see. In my, I don't think Bill Gates is wrong. The next one, we
Oh
got
no, I don't
lucky on
think he's
this
wrong
one,
either. Yeah.
and it's only a matter of time before something crops up, and
Yeah.
it could even be a COVID variant that does come,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
This thing seems to mutate
Yeah.
at a pace that they can't keep up with, and
Right.
I think it's actually the CDC that they're again going back to they don't want to say that they don't know. Um,
Yeah.
I I think they need to be more. If anything needs to be more apparent, they need to say like we don't know. Like this thing mutates in a way that we haven't seen before.
Yeah.
And it is a super virus to a degree,
Yeah.
where it does have the ability to move faster than we can keep up with, and that's why it's important to continue to wear masks. That explanation is a lot better than
Hmm.
just keep doing it, right?
I feel like yeah, you're right. I know that they're the public health and they're the CDC, but maybe saying I don't know is okay, and maybe them saying we have suspicion of this, but we can't say for sure. So out of an abundance of caution, we recommend X, Y, and Z. I think that
Yep.
would be much more accepted, than them saying one thing and then research happens and later on it's not true, because then that sounds like they lied, especially to people. And I'm not saying they lied, but I'm saying that to some people, to a layperson that doesn't understand how the science works and how science changes as research goes on, they're seeing one thing in January and another thing being said in June, and they're like, well, which one's true? And it's like, well, kind of both. Like from a science perspective, it's like at the time in January it was true because of how much, because of the data we had at that time, right?
Right.
But as data gets analyzed and we collect more of it, that's going to change. So technically they're both true, but I don't think the layperson sees it that way. So I think that um
There,
the
there's
public
just no
health,
transparency, right?
there's because there's no transparency. So I think that the or even admitting of like we don't know the full impact of this, like you were saying, like we don't know, but we suspect blah 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 blah. Therefore, you should, out of an abundance of caution, do X, Y, and Z. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think messaging wise that would have gone over a lot better, and more transparency as time went on, like regular reports of like, okay, the data seems to be showing this. You might be seeing changes to our recommendations, blah, 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 blah. Because like just recently, I think it was, they changed the recommendations from, is it 6 feet to 3 feet? I think. I don't even know if that went through. There was some talk of them
That,
doing that.
but I heard that, and then
I think they might have said no.
all the
Like,
new commercials still say 6 feet.
yeah, 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 yeah.
All the
So
new commercials still say wear masks. So
right,
like,
right.
um, they're, they're they're all over the place on those
Exactly.
guidelines as
But
well.
had they told people, like been very transparent about that, and gone, okay, well, as the data comes in and we do more analyzing of it, our recommendations are subject to change based on the data we know, right? That way, when they go from 6 feet to 3 feet, if they do that, people aren't like, well, wait a minute, you told us 15 feet, then 6 feet, now 3 feet. Why does it keep changing? If people realize that ahead of time, because not everybody is a science person, and
Right.
you
Although
know,
I swear there's a lot of people that think they are. During
well, that's a whole different
um,
subject.
yeah.
uh,
All of a sudden, a lot of people became medical experts during this last time around, and it's like, no, you have a medical assistant degree, not a doctorate.
I would love to get somebody that knows that's like a public health person to talk to, because I'd love to know where they got the data from for the COVID deaths, because like we were talking about, as computer people, data people, where did the data come from and how pure is it, basically.
Right.
um, and I'd also like to know what their thought is on public messaging, because I think the public messaging was a bit of a disaster for this.
It really was,
Yeah,
and the politics of the election really did not help anything.
no, it
And
did not.
and it made it political. It made the whole whether people want to
Unfortunately,
admit it or not, it
yeah,
made it very political.
right.
And even now, I think I saw a horrid video the other day of people being essentially either beaten and or arrested for not wearing a mask.
Hmm.
And it's while I agree that masking helps, okay, I don't believe that people should be thrown in jail for not wearing a mask and
Hmm.
especially not beaten to the ground with batons as they're kind of showing.
Wow.
It was kind of like it takes a whole another. I'm very much about freedom. A former Marine, I went to Iraq. I fought for people's freedom.
Hmm.
If someone wants to be out in the open and not wear a mask, that is their choice. It's different if you're walking into somebody's home or a store. I wear a mask because I want to shop at the store, and that's the rule. And I will wear a mask, and I'll make people feel comfortable, and that's fine. But if you're walking on the sidewalk or at a church service where a bunch of people have decided that they're not going to wear a mask, that's on them. But beating people to the ground for
Hmm.
not wearing a mask,
Wow.
that's a whole nother topic that I'm like, whoa, where's that
Yeah.
coming from now? That's not freedom, and that's hopefully not where I live. So,
um. Oh, I forgot what I was gonna say, but I know. So we've been talking about the data and data integrity, stuff like that. Um, where do you see this headed? Like, what's the emerging technology for the real time data? Is it Elon's Neuralink? Is it is it something else?
I think the thing with Elon, because the space that I work in is very focused in an area, right? And getting my technology into a space where it becomes a voting system or a reporting system for those types of things. I don't know if we have that appetite as a company, right? We're more focused on how do we make IT operations move faster.
Yeah.
Elon has a little bit bigger of a vision, and he has a little bit more, dare I say, it, political influence to go in and say, I have a solution.
Hmm.
And he has lobbyists. He has the money to put lobbyists behind it that say we have a solution. And then lobbyists in turn into representatives in Congress, in the Senate, and then they have the ability to say we have a solution,
Right.
and then they have a way to go about putting action to it. So there's that's actually where I feel like a lot of the real time data out there goes. I don't know what the emerging technology will be. I did a little bit of research the other day. There's only one electronic voting company that I could really see that was trying to make some waves.
Okay.
There's a lot of opposition to it, even amongst friends that are technologists. I had a friend that he's a IT guy at Boeing, and he had every reason in the book as to why we couldn't go to digital voting and that it would be
Hmm.
hacked. I actually believe people themselves are a lot easier to be hacked than the digital voting system.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Just simply through our media. If we didn't go back and touch on that, by the way, but just to state for the record, like if Russia meddled with our voting system through influencing how people thought in 2016, I think the American media reverse engineered that and did the exact same thing in 2020. I think if anybody's influencing our votes now, it's definitely the media, and they are putting their own agenda out there ahead of actual facts in a lot of cases. But anyways, going back to the emerging technology, I don't know who's got it or where it's going to come from. I just hope that, and I'm starting to think about like how would I go about starting that? How would I go about piquing that interest? If I was to start a company, where do I go to get funding? And then from there, how do I get the technology built? How do
Yeah.
I get it in front of people? How do I gain any kind of influence with it to actually make people think that this is a good idea? And the opposition is stifling actually.
Right.
So in the other place where we've seen this was actually a movie. It was a Robin Williams movie right before the 2004 elections. Okay, so it was Robin Williams, Man of the Year, and it's kind of based almost like a Colbert story where he's a comedian on Comedy Central
Hmm.
and somehow wins the presidential election, but it's because they actually downplayed the digital voting system because he won due to a coding error because
Uh.
he had two L's in his name or something like that. And it was like a crazy weird like very simple error, right? And of course you have to make it very simple per movie, dare say it, right?
Right.
But and especially a comedy. but they made it a very simple error. And I felt like that movie actually positions people mentally against any kind of digital voting system, because
Oh,
this
I see what
movie
you're
back
saying.
in
Yeah.
2004, where everybody loves Robin Williams and watched this movie, um, but they saw this flawed digital voting system.
Hmm.
And now here we are 16 years later, and we still don't have a digital voting system.
Right.
And people will oppose it. I almost feel like tooth and nail to a degree. Maybe not entirely due to that movie, but because people don't trust. They seem to think that putting pen to paper in a Scantron system is still more secure,
Right.
and that it can't be meddled with. But I kind of tend to disagree a little bit
Yeah,
at this point.
it's kind of amazing. Like, when I was watching the election unfold this year, being somebody who works in technology, and they're showing the voting centers and stuff, and you're just seeing people manually, visually counting these things out, and all I can think of is like, there's so much human error that can be involved in there. Not even purposeful, like, manipulation or anything of the vote, but just human error.
Yep.
One of the biggest problems we have in technology is usually the person, the user. Users putting in bad data. This goes back to the data integrity thing. For example, at my work, we have a system that we have to use, right? It's a state system, and the person can put in whatever they want for their name. They don't have any checks, no checks or balances. It's all free form, right?
Yep.
But on our side, we're expected to take that data and then build out accounts automatically with that data. The problem is people do all kinds of weird things with their names. They might, if they have a name that has like a special character in it, right?
Yep.
They can do that in the system, but our system can't handle that, right? Um, Middle names. Some people put just like M for your middle name, right? Or some
Yep.
people might put M dot or the full name, like Michael or something, right? If you put in just like M dot, it'll freak out. The system just like it's like I don't know what to do with this. I don't know what to do with this, right?
Right.
Or people that have hyphenated names or double middle names, or I mean there's all these different variants of data, right? And we try to account for all of them, but every once in a while we get a really weird one that the system, and then their account doesn't get generated. So it's like, how do we handle that? That's data that we can't control, right? So I kind of forgot where I was going with that, but has to do with like the data integrity, and oh, I remember. And so when you have people physically counting out ballots, right? How do you eliminate that? That human error. It's bound to happen. Um,
Absolutely. And then there's even the ones that we don't hear about that get thrown out. A lot of people, when I came home from Iraq, one of the weird ones that I heard was it was the Dino Rossi, was it Maria Cantwell
that sounds
election.
right.
And she asked for three recounts, or two
Uh
two
huh.
recounts. They basically counted the votes three times, and she didn't win until the third one. And but what I heard that she did on the back end was she went and asked, somehow got access to these ballots that weren't signed, that didn't count because there was no signature.
Oh,
One thing
okay.
about Washington State is that we are all remote ballot or mail-in ballot, but it requires a signature. If you don't sign it, your ballot doesn't count.
Right.
So she went and got all these ballots signed. Like she physically went and got the ballots, went to the people's houses, sent out like a crew of
Oh.
people and started door knocking. Hey, I need you to sign your ballot.
Oh, interesting.
And I don't know how true or not true the story is, right? I think I was just coming home from Iraq, and didn't really care a whole lot, but I had heard that, and
Yeah.
and had Dino Rossi maybe done the same thing, would it have turned out differently?
Right. Right.
And so when you start hearing about, here we are today, we're still going back and forth about, did the vote count, or yes or no? Was it valid? Yes or no? Was it,
Right.
I'm so sick of hearing it. I'm like, we have all the technology and work, like this should not even be a
Right.
thing.
Right.
And we just need to, again, just figure it out. We have a technology solution. We have all the ways in the world that we should be able to tell if a live person voted or not,
Right.
or if and we just need a system. And a lot of people want to oppose it, and then okay, fine, that's cool, but we need to get a start somewhere
Yeah.
and gain enough trust and confidence in a system. And I'm sad to say, like I don't know if we'll have it by the next presidential vote.
Yeah,
Probably not
that's probably
at this
not.
point.
Yeah.
But we need to start somewhere, and we
Um,
need to get it in place sooner rather than later.
yeah. Not I'm going to go down a little bit of a conspiracy theory rabbit hole here. But part of me wonders if there is political pushback from this like
Oh,
idea
absolutely. I
because
can only imagine.
yeah, because right now there's with in-person voting and all these rules on like whether a vote gets tossed out or anything like that. We could solve a lot of those with technology, and if you remove that unknown of is this valid vote, is this invalid, they can't tie that up in court anymore because right now they can just keep going to court over and over and over again, right? And set, try to get different ballots approved or thrown out. And as a voter, it's like, I voted, how dare you throw out my vote, like, because of some reason, you know what I mean? Like, I thought I followed all the rules, and I don't even know if there's a way to check to see if your vote actually went through. Maybe there is. um but
I think in Washington State there is. I
I,
think there's a way to go back and actually look at
oh,
your
okay.
voting history with the scantrons that they have.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I
Um,
think you're right on the on for the Washington State. But like, you know what I'm saying? Like, if we remove, it's the technology problem, issue again. Like, if we solve these technologies, some people get upset because you've automated their job out, or you've automated some workaround that they have, or something like that, right? And in
yep.
this case, I feel like if we went to digital voting and we really streamlined it and it was really secure, the politicians are going to push back because now they can't manipulate it in the court system. You know what I
So
mean?
so there was actually one in my research, and it was funny. I actually interviewed for this company a couple years ago. The founder and CEO of Okta. He owns a
Yep.
basically they specialize in identity, what's
Yeah.
called digital identity, right? And being able to log in, how you authenticate into your systems. He kind of laid out a couple different key areas where he believed that a digital voting system would need. One of the things that he called out, and I don't know if I agree with or not, is the recount. You have to have a way to do a recount.
Yeah.
In digital voting, when the data is real time, if you're doing real time data and you do it correctly, I don't believe that there should be a need for a recount. However, a recount could just simply be tell everyone that they need to go back into the system and revote
Right.
and not even have to go back and because you already know what they voted before
Yeah.
regardless like that's documented, recorded, and time stamped in the way that I was kind of describing how to do it before.
Mm-hmm.
So sure, you could hit go on real time data, but it's it's the exact same as doing a refresh on a web page, right? The data is going to come back 100% same it did
Yeah. It's not going
10
to be any
seconds ago
different.
because the data's there. um so like with a recount though, you could simply say, hey, this is too close to call. Everyone needs to go back in, rethink what they voted for before,
Mm-hmm.
and resubmit their vote and see if anything's changed.
Hmm.
And maybe somebody did fat finger a vote. I don't know, but
Huh.
that you're right though. In my opinion, a recount becomes a little bit less relevant.
Yeah.
But some people still want that mechanism. I believe that mechanism is actually there by law at the moment.
I think it is. Yeah.
So but you're right. It does take a lot of the legalities around the recount,
Mm-hmm.
and taking it to court. And are these valid or are they not valid? The whole argument about how many millions of votes didn't get counted because they were called um, um, unlawful, right? And that goes
Right.
back to when I talked about signatures in 2004. This time around, it was were they in the ballot box by 8 p.m. on a
Yeah.
certain
Yeah.
day, right? And that's where Trump was trying to argue that the votes were illegal, right?
Right. Right.
Or there was something about them that made them so that they shouldn't have been counted.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Truth be told, I think with this last election, this is my personal opinion. I think Trump knew how to play the electoral college and was leaning on that this time around. And I think his miscalculation was all the people that fled California and that had moved to Nevada and New Mexico and Arizona. and those states went from red states to blue states this last time,
Yeah.
and completely changed the electoral college,
Yeah.
or the weight of the electoral college. And he didn't foresee that happening, and that's why I think he lost the vote. He lost those 3 states, and that would have, those 3 states alone would have swayed the entire
Yeah.
balance of the vote.
Um, yeah, I'd be curious like how that would work out, because without the legal maneuvering, I think a lot of the politicians' tools are gone now for manipulation, and even to a point like voters, like this is a bad example, but like let's say somebody wins right now, and there's like now's a perfect example, right? In the past 4 to 5 years, it's like, well, this person's illegitimate. This person is, they stole the vote. Blah blah blah. It's like once it's digital, it's like, no, these are the digital verified votes. You can't make that argument anymore, like, or at least it's a
Right.
lot harder, and so now the politicians can't play that card in future attacks against opponents, or the loser can't come back and be like, no no no, I won, and I think it almost hamstrings their politicking a little bit, so it'd be interesting to see what happens there.
I'm going to turn my camera off for a second as I
Yeah.
get some more coffee, but I'll still have you on audio.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So as I think you're right in the fact that politicians might not want the ability to do this digital type of voting. Like
Uh-huh.
they lose those maneuvers, they lose that control. One of the other things that I thought about with digital voting is even the question of, do we as a people want to keep the electoral college?
Right.
The electoral college has an interesting history in itself. There is a reason as to why it was put in place in the first place.
Right.
But regardless of my thoughts, my whole idea about digital voting is that it puts the power back in the hands of the people a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more, and that's really what I want. And the question that should be to the people of the country: do we as a people want the electoral college? Yes or no?
Right.
You hear a lot of people that think it should go away. You hear a lot of people that argue it should stay.
Uh-huh.
But I think it should be actually ultimately put to a vote in itself.
Hmm.
And we don't have those mechanisms today as a people. We as the people have lost a lot of control, and
Yes.
the power is the hands of our representatives. And that goes back to what I was talking about before. At a minimum, we should have a system that tells our representatives what the majority of their struggling with the word, the people they
Constituents.
represent. Yeah, I was worried about mispronouncing it. Yeah, so, but basically they should know what their people want. I don't feel like they have that today
Maybe
in the
that's the
least
first
form.
step. Maybe that's the first step to the electronic voting for bigger things like presidential elections and those congressional seats. Maybe the first step is having an application that lets unique um, identifiers, like a unique person, have a secure vote for a particular topic, and that information, not the person's information, but the way the vote and stuff went out on that topic, maybe that's the public facing part, so people can see that this is what the people think on these percentages with this many people, but your representative voted differently, and that's
Right.
just a public facing thing. That way there's almost an accountability on the representative, and the people at least have a say of like, well, look, we didn't agree with him, and then that could affect that representative's future election chances. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
now, like, there's really no accountability one way or the other in that
exactly,
form. And
exactly.
and I think you're right. At a minimum, if people get used to expressing their idea or opinion that way,
Hmm.
politically, it gains a little bit of confidence. It becomes a system that they become used to,
Right,
versus, well, that's new. I don't trust it.
right,
Well, okay, the first couple rounds, we're just going to use it as a mechanism to gauge the public, to
right.
poll the public, so to speak.
Yeah. It
And
it
then,
Yeah.
Dare I say it, that's an adoption strategy, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
um,
exactly. You know, that could be like a phase one kind of thing is let's collect the people's votes basically, but these don't have any actual effectuation or ability to change anything. You know, it's like this is
right,
just gathering the public thought basically, and then you could have like the counterpoint basically on this thing. It's like, well, you know, this many people voted for this, and this is the how it breaks down demographically or whatever, but the representative voted the exact opposite. You know what I mean? And then you're like, oh, he's not actually being representative. He or she is not being representative of the actual constituents. So next election, maybe we shouldn't vote for that person. You know,
right.
and that would it would be a non-binding way to have accountability. And then maybe in the future you press that a little further, and you're like, well, how about we move to use this system to actually vote for these like things, you know? So I kind of
Yeah,
see
the only
that. Yeah,
my only concern out the gate is like if it doesn't count, people won't do it. It
that's
won't care
true.
as much.
That's true. Yeah.
So that's the only thing that I can think of where okay, that might backfire.
Yeah, adoption
Um,
might be difficult. Like, I mean, there's already people, a fair amount of people that don't vote in actual elections because they don't think it matters. It doesn't change anything. You know what I mean? So it's hard to
right.
get them to even adopt physically voting right now with the way the system's set up. So um, that would be a hard hurdle to get over. I think as far as adoption goes, those people that don't vote now might vote with a digital system if it was like presented to them and saying here's this secure, it'll for sure count kind of way.
Right.
Maybe they'll adopt then, but as long as it's optional or has no impact, maybe they won't. That's kind of a hard, that's a psychology
I
of a
I
person
feel like there's
issue.
a convenience thing as well. As much as people talk about, well, it's already pretty convenient to drop a box or drop your ballot into the mailbox or into a ballot box, right?
Right.
But I mean, when I think about, hey, I get a company that asks me to take a survey, okay, and they ask me to, well, it's an 8-minute survey, and it's by phone, or I can do it on my phone, or I do it just, you know, click, 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 because
Right,
eight
right.
minutes I can turn into 4 if I'm fast enough, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, maybe I want to get my opinion heard, maybe I don't. But the convenience of just being able to say, click, click, click. I guess the only other concern that I would have is does it does it become so much fodder? Is there another thing to vote on every week? And realistically, in our world, our representatives are voting whether it's county,
Yeah.
city, state, or federal. They are voting on things every single week that
Mm-hmm.
impact our lives. And if you really want to get your voice heard, you almost have to be on top of it every
Yeah.
single day, really. Me personally, the other thing I said that I do is I do real estate on the side. I'm a
Uh-huh.
landlord. I have 11 doors, and there's a lot of landlord laws. They're with the eviction moratorium and things like that. They're trying to make some of these laws permanent,
Wow.
and it's becoming really a hard pill to swallow on some of the things that they want to put in place, and things that are like that's going to have an impact for years to come
Mm-hmm.
in the
Mm-hmm.
world of being a landlord and
Yeah.
owning real estate. So it's I want my voice heard. It's actually probably the first time I've started paying attention. There's just similar to this the federal ones. There's state bills that you can watch the progress of and where they're at, who's
Yeah.
voting on it. And I started paying a lot more attention to those because those actually impact my bottom line and my wallet, right? And
Right.
even my ability to interact with my tenants to a degree, and who I can choose or not choose to be a tenant. And
Wow. Okay.
so I'm watching them pretty close, and there was a click here button to let your representatives know what you think.
Uh-huh.
So at a minimum, I wanted to get my voice heard, and put in it's. I think you have like a minimum of 500 characters what you can write to these people, and it sends them a little message, and more likely they'll get back to you, but they're still the ones ultimately deciding or voting, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if there's much swaying them one way or the other, with regards to that.
Hmm. Yeah. That'll be interesting. That's like just a as a side topic with the landlord thing. I have some concerns about the shutdowns and the moratoriums and economic impact later on. Like right now, it's kind of it's kind of hobbling along, but like so my understanding, I'm not a landlord, but
Right.
I do have a mortgage, right? And I can only the majority of landlords are holding mortgages on these houses. They don't own them outright, right?
Right.
So they're counting on income to come in for the mortgage, right? To pay, from their tenant. Um, so the not so much the eviction moratorium, but the forbearances or like the rent forbearances. There's a lot. My understanding is that basically you can't evict somebody for not paying for several months. I think it is now, right?
At, at all.
Oh wow, okay,
I, I I have someone that has not paid rent since August of last year.
wow. So you might, as the mortgage holder, you might be able to get a forbearance for the property that you're renting out. But I
Correct.
don't think
But
what people
but I take a
realize,
massive hit to my credit if I do that.
not only
It
that, but I think
yeah.
at the end of the forbearance, it's not like, oh, we're going to start payments up again. It's like, oh, all 12 months are due once the
Correct.
forbearance is over. So
And and
you're
and
just
technically it's still the same with the rent too.
yeah.
Like
Oh, okay.
there is some movements to try to put rent forgiveness in place, and
Uh huh.
those same representatives are fighting for mortgage for forgiveness
Oh,
too.
okay.
But how do you make that fair? How do you come back and say, well, the guy that did continue to pay his mortgage for the last 12 months,
Yeah.
right, is equal with the guy that chose not to?
Yeah.
Like, and it's the same thing with the rent, right? I have lots of renters who are paying the rent,
Right.
and like there was no way that someone in the Navy could get away with that right now. If for example, I live in a Navy town, I rent to a lot of Navy people. They all are getting paychecks regardless of COVID, right?
Right.
And if I had one of them not pay rent, I would immediately go to their command and be like, this person decided to not pay rent,
Right.
and I know that there's a mortgage eviction right now, but they're still getting a paycheck. They weren't impacted in the way that some other people were.
Right.
And I can almost guarantee without a shadow of a doubt that their command would mandate that that person pay, or else they would be subject to the penalties within the military.
Right. 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 But like, so my concern though is that so there, I feel like they're just kind of kicking the can down the road because eventually the forbearances or whatever without forgiveness across the board, right, is going to come due. So a landlord's going to owe 12 plus months of mortgage. The renter is not going to have that, even though they owe it, right? So then what happens when the landlord has to foreclose on that house, right? Because they can't afford it anymore. That renter is going to be out anyways. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And now we have a house in foreclosure. So I'm a little concerned that there's going to be a housing crisis in like 12 months or so. It'll take a little while to catch up, but if they don't do something, and I don't think they really thought this out when they were doing this, then I'm a little concerned about the issue. I think what they should have done was, but the problem is the banks will be involved. What they should have done was done a mortgage pause. If you can't afford or your renter can't afford those payments, pause the 30-year mortgage for a year or two, right, until the person can pay again, and then just resume right there. You know what I mean?
The problem was it was so I'm in a group of guys. We're kind of coming up with a name, but we're actually kind of thinking about naming ourselves the trusted advisors.
Uh huh.
So we're like kind of a just a small group of guys in this county. We are all it's mostly targeted towards real estate, but just business ventures in general.
Uh huh.
Of like we know who to go to talk to get pretty much anything business wise done in the county. That's kind of the goal of the group.
Okay.
But one of the guys is a mortgage guy, and he is very deep into the mortgage world as to what it would mean. So when they came out with the forbearance thing, when Trump said you will not be able to foreclose on anybody that doesn't pay their mortgage for the next year, I think that first of the month there was something like it was into the trillions of dollars of mortgages that were going to come due that next round
Right.
or that next first, right? And it had the mortgage industry scared to death
Oh yeah.
because And inversely, they dropped rates so low that there was some mortgage brokers that had to shut their doors because they had more loan applications than they had money to give out.
Wow.
So so there was this weird balance. It was almost kind of the opposite of 2008
Uh-huh.
because people were still refinancing these properties. They were pulling cash back out, right? But inversely, then there's the forbearance question: is this person actually going to pay, or are they going to go straight into forbearance?
Mm.
Also, because so many people had been refinancing, and if they decided to not make that first mortgage payment, a lot of loan servicers will automatically sell your loan. If you don't make that first payment, it disqualifies them from being able to sell the loan.
Oh.
So then there's this huge like domino effect of what happens if, and I think we've actually gotten past a lot of that now.
Okay.
I don't think as many people went into forbearance as what the banks initially were scared of. Like
Right, right.
they were scared pretty bad when Trump announced that. There was a lot of analysts that just went into like this is it. This is where the economy crashes and
Economic
dies.
collapse. Yeah.
And because there is so many, like we are so heavily even our federal dollar is engaged in mortgage-backed securities.
Hmm.
The bonds and everything are all just tied into that way more than they probably should be.
Right.
So when all that started happening, now inversely, I have heard of several people, several landlords that they could afford the mortgages on their rental properties, but because they weren't receiving that income, they were no longer able to pay their mortgage. And
Yeah.
with the way that landlords work, a lot of them are usually a lot more, financially and fiscally responsible.
Hmm.
So what these people did is they actually end up selling their own homes, right? And moving into mom's basement or whatever they had to do to keep their own little businesses going.
Yeah.
Which is a really sad story. The worst of it, and it was just one I heard. I think I read about him. It was a particular individual in Yakima. He had over 100 renters not paying rent
Wow.
and not able to do anything about it. And at that point, he is just at the whim of our state government and the banks.
Hmm.
And what does that mean? Will he ever be able to get back on track in life? And now the only thing that he could potentially do, and what a lot of smart landlords have done, is they've incorporated themselves. They put their properties into LLCs.
Yeah.
So when you can't pay that note anymore, does it impact you, or did it impact your business, your
Right, right,
business
right.
name? And so hopefully there's people that are insulated like that, but there is a lot of smaller, people that are just starting out with it. Me and myself, I've not actually put everything into LLCs just yet.
Hmm.
So that's a whole nother bag of worms and economic impact. But yeah, it is. You're right. It is just getting kicked the can down the road. I don't know. This time around is different. The housing crisis. There is a housing crisis coming, but it's actually a shortage of homes,
Yeah.
and the banks aren't going to be kicking anybody out anytime soon, I don't think. It's actually, the opposite thing is there was too much inventory in 2008. Right now, the inventory is so low that people are still paying right now $50,000 to $100,000 above asking price for
Yeah,
houses.
in cash. In cash.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep,
I've heard the
yep.
market is crazy. I mean, we bought our house. It was our first house we ever owned, and we bought it 4 years ago. I think like last month was like the 4 year anniversary, and I was talking. So I'm not even looking anymore. And my dad said something, so I was like kind of looking on the real estate sites, and I'm like, wow, these prices are crazy. And then I had some friends go, oh, it's worse than you think because the houses are going for 70, 100,000 more than asking price, and it's all cash, multiple offers.
Yep.
It's crazy out there. And I'm like, wow,
Well,
I never would have guessed. Like,
so we were kind of talking about how it's going to stabilize, as people, like right now, for example. Um, I don't know if you remember the school we went to, right?
yeah,
Peace
yeah,
Lutheran School.
yeah,
Across the street, there was this huge like soil factory.
yeah.
That has all been cleared. You can now see almost literally 3/4 of a mile down. It has been cleared and flattened, and they're going to build 350 houses in there in the next couple of years.
350.
Yeah. And then
Wow.
literally across the highway, they're going to build another 300. And then Like we're at the point right now where they're clearing so much land. We're getting cougars and bears showing
Yeah.
up in parts of town that there shouldn't be.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. I have a friend who went for a jog, in Pierce County, and he lives in a suburban area. Went for a jog one morning and saw a cougar cross the street, and he's like, "Well, time to go back home." Like,
yep. So that's what's going on right now. But I don't know. And the pandemic has done one thing, and this is where my company thrived. It was sending everybody to work from home.
yeah,
And that's a huge cultural change. It was something that a lot of people wanted and have
mm-hmm,
been pushing for over the years, but there was always this huge resistance,
yeah,
and the pandemic forced its hand.
mm-hmm,
And now companies aren't sending people back to the office.
yeah.
Uh, uh, I can't remember if we talked about it before, but I actually used to work for Starbucks corporate, and I have a lot of friends that work for Starbucks corporate. They don't work in the building anymore. Um, Starbucks says we'll continue to send people home through the beginning of 2022, and they're going to reopen their corporate office down on Utah Ave
Mm-hmm.
as basically a ginormous Starbucks. It's going to be a place
Oh,
full of small conference rooms and couches and lots of yeah. Have you ever been in the corporate office at Starbucks? They usually have 4 kitchens per floor, and you can make whatever coffee you want.
oh, okay.
So it is going to be a ginormous Starbucks with that same kind of like feel when you walk in, and it'll
Mm.
be there for collaboration purposes. But
So they're
they
converting
will
it
no longer
to like a
require
shared
people.
workspace, basically.
Basically, and they
Oh,
were
okay.
already moving in that direction, but now you won't even have like an assigned desk
Yeah.
or anything.
eh,
There won't even really be desk and monitors. It's really just
Oh.
there to come in for a couple hours, collaborate, do a team meeting or whiteboard session, meet
Mm-hmm.
with a vendor, and then turn around
Mm.
and go home. That's going to be kind of their goal to continue to limit exposure long term as
Yeah.
other COVID like things start to come out.
Well, I think that's the future is, like you were saying, a lot of people, especially people in IT and industries like that, have been wanting this forever. Like they're, for example, my job, I'm a computer science like developer, right? I'm a programmer. I
Yep.
can do my job 100% from home. 100%.
Right.
As long as I have a computer and an internet connection, I'm good, right?
The key thing that you just said there was the internet connection.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
So,
exactly.
so one of the properties that I'm working on right now is out in a place called Tuhia. Do you remember
I
Tuhia?
know, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so it's out there,
It's
right?
out there.
Getting high-speed internet out there is a limitation. However, there's 2 things I'm waiting on right now that will make this property very favorable to
Hmm.
vacationers and work from anywhere type people in the
Right.
next year. There's a huge effort to push fiber optic networks out into the rural areas of
Yeah.
Kitsap County
Yeah.
and Mason County. So supposedly by July this year, I'm going to have gigabit fiber to that house.
Wow.
The second thing that's coming is Elon's Starlink.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and that will even open up even more so than just this area, right? This area is already pretty well wired, but
Hmm.
start thinking like the Dakotas, a
Yeah.
mountaintop cabin in the middle of South Dakota,
Yeah.
somewhere where you couldn't work from remotely before because the best you could do was maybe a DSL link or
Maybe.
something like that, right? Now, if you can get a satellite Starlink connected, this is where I think it will start to stabilize. People, not everyone requires mountains and ocean like I do. I love mountains. I love ocean. It's why I live where I live. Some people love the desert.
Yeah.
Some people love the Midwest. Some people love the plains. I think that you'll start to see this load spread of where we were all huddling around Seattle, LA,
Yep.
a little bit of Portland. I can't really. I mean, Portland is obviously
Kind
pretty
of.
populated, but it's not.
Austin.
It's not. Yeah,
Yeah.
these places will start to as people start fleeing the bigger cities because companies are no longer requiring people to live where they
Hmm.
work. I think longer term, and especially so, the other part of the story was a realtor friend of mine wrote 4 offers in a weekend for 4 highly qualified, all above asking price, and even at the level where they were releasing escrow funds um, as soon as mutual agreement was signed,
Hmm.
like not even having to wait for the deal to close to receive
Wow.
escrow funds.
Wow.
He wrote 4 offers like that in a weekend and got none of them.
Huh.
Like 50 to $100,000 above asking price and was outbid in every single case.
Wow.
So what I'm seeing is, as more and more professionals, are going to be able to move outside. They're starting with the suburbs of the areas where they're at now because they're still kind of mentally attached with
Yeah.
familiarity. But when they break that and they say, I can go to North Dakota and buy a ranch, a
Yes.
50-acre ranch for
Yes.
$100,000 and not have to compete with the others,
Yeah.
I'm going to go do that.
Yeah, it's a huge temptation. I mean, people might not think this, but I don't know if you feel the same way, but I know a lot of people that work in IT and stuff. Where my wife and I were just talking about this. We were like, "Oh, it'd be so cool if we could afford to buy like a little ranch, like a little homestead, and have some animals on there and stuff, right?" But here in Washington State, that's so expensive to buy to get enough land to do that.
Well, on this side of the state, I
This
mean,
side of the
but
state, yeah. But yeah,
you go up a little bit northeast and Okanagan area,
yeah.
you could do that with ease.
But we were talking about
But the
how a lot of
internet connectivity is the only thing that limits you.
exactly. But we were talking about how a lot of people in technology, when they're not at work, they actually are not anti-tech, but they're kind of like, oh, I would gladly go tend to the animals
Right.
and do like some like local farming kind of thing in my spare time. I don't, because a lot of people are like, oh, do you do this at home? And I'm like, no, like.
Right.
That's my job, like, but yeah, it's really interesting because, like, my job I can do 100% as long as I have an internet connection and a computer. And it seems like businesses, like you were saying, the pandemic forced their hand basically. Like a lot of IT people were like, I just want to, can I work from home? I could save 2 hours of commute time or more. I feel healthier. And they're like, no, we want you to be here, right? So the pandemic hit, and now it's to their benefit to keep us healthy to stay at home, right? And now they're realizing, oh, there really was no reason for them to be here because they're just as productive when they're at home for the most part, right? I mean, on average, I would say, like for my team in particular, I mean, we've been putting out more work than we would have normally at the office
Right.
because we don't have the small interruptions where somebody swings by your office and they're like, hey, then they just start talking about something and you're like, I'm kind of busy. Like, at home, got my little office here. I just hunker down and work. You know what I mean? And I think that now corporate is realizing, oh, we get just as much produ- productivity or more out of them if they work from home. We don't have to pay um, rent costs for office buildings, right? So they can start
Yep.
getting rid of office buildings. So they're gonna save money there. They're like, at most we might need to give them, and this is their choice. They give their employees a small stipend to pay for internet or whatever, right?
Right.
But other than that, like the employees is happier. Like, and speaking for myself, sometimes I get called in at off hours, right? If something goes down, I'm sure you've run into the same thing.
For
Um,
for me, it's the time zones. Because I can't
oh yeah,
travel and I
yeah,
can't be there in person. I'm getting up at 5 in the morning to
right.
take calls from London or the East Coast.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So like sometimes I'll get a call at like 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and they're like, "This is down. Can you look into this?" Right?
Yep.
When I was in the office, I hated doing that because you would spend all this time getting home and then you're finally like disconnecting basically, right?
Yep.
You're like you ate dinner, you're about to go to bed, and then they're like, "Okay, we need you to come, we need you to jump back on and do this." And like mentally that was always kind of difficult, but if you're I find that if I'm working from home, I haven't made that association with like going to work and then disconnecting completely yet. So when they're like, "Hey, do you mind if jumping on at like 10 o'clock at night to like reboot this system or something, right?" And I'm like,
Right.
"Yeah, sure, no worries. I don't have to go in to do it. Like, I didn't have to do any commute, so I feel pretty good. Like, sure, why
The
not?"
blood pressure drop just on commute alone,
Oh yeah,
right?
totally, yeah,
Like
yeah.
if they could take a measure across that right now, that would be a very interesting
Oh yeah, totally.
statistic.
But it's interesting because like now that they've forced their hands and stuff, I think there's going to be a continual push, like Starbucks is doing, a continual push to do these remote work, telework setups, and it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the future with that plus continuing automation, because
Right.
automation is probably going to be the next thing. Because I could see how in the with the pandemic and stuff, people are going to want to eliminate exposure to more people. So it's much easier to have a kiosk instead of somebody who might have something. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like mobile kiosk, you like make your order, show up, and it's there. Like just do it on your phone, scan your QR code to get your to show you're there. Here's your meal, like kind of thing.
Right.
So it's going to be really interesting to see what the pandemic was terrible. It's unfortunate that anybody like passed away or got sick. It's but I'm really curious what the cultural impact is going to be. Not just on healthcare, but also work from home, technology, housing. I mean, I think it's going to impact a lot of things. Like in the next
agree.
5 to 10
I
years.
think there's a lot of things that are here to change. It's hard to say like if they're for better or for worse, right?
Right.
Obviously, I mentioned the stressor of traffic, but
Mm-hmm.
now there's different stressors, right? There's
Yeah.
the neighbor's dog. There's the neighbors. Earlier you mentioned your neighbor doing work outside in the
Always
middle
working
of
on his
like
boat.
So you never know like what that next. There's just different stressors that kind of
Yeah.
work their way in. And then there's just the stress. Like there's a lot of studies going on right now about being on the camera for a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting.
Right.
It's actually a lot more mentally fatiguing for people to be kind of watched like that,
Oh yeah.
or and constantly on calls, and we're not getting the mental breaks, even the bathroom breaks like we used to.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you used to have a lot more hallway conversations, and
Uh-huh.
now you don't get those types of interactions,
Right.
and people are just back to back to back all day long,
Mm-hmm.
and then expected to still kind of do some work, some work
Yeah.
product. So there's just a lot of those types of scenarios going on, and their productivity for the most part is up, but I think people's work days are actually, well, it's a mix. For me, some days are longer.
Mm-hmm.
My company has gotten to be a little bit more flexible about it, so I will actually try to take, as soon as my meetings are done for the day, I will take a break and go do something else
Oh,
till
okay.
that evening. And if there is something that I need to produce or something that I need to work on, that can usually wait until the evening hours, and I'll come
Okay.
back to it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that
Mine
way,
is more like if something needs to be done that's going to result in any sort of downtime, it has to be done really early in the morning.
right.
So that nobody sees it happen. So
Very cool.
yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with all the different societal potential impacts that the pandemic has caused. So, oh man, I did not realize we've been going for this long.
It's actually a long podcast, but yeah, we've
Wow.
been
Okay,
doing good.
this is gonna be my longest one yet by quite a bit. I've been averaging about an hour and 15, and you're like an hour over that almost. So,
Wow.
but no, it was really, really interesting. But I don't want to keep you for too long because I've already taken like 2 hours of your time.
No worries. Yeah, we'll have a part two sometime soon.
Yeah. There's there's a couple people that I
spread
want to
them
have
out.
come back on and continue some conversations. But so one thing I've been doing to kind of keep that 6 degrees of separation theme going is I've been asking the guests to give me 2, possibly 3 people that they think might be interesting to talk to that you're connected to,
Okay. Yeah.
and kind of what they do, and then like you can message me the contact information or get me into contact with them later if you think they might be interested. But just
Yeah.
so
I
people,
got a
yeah,
list of guys,
yeah,
mostly from that group that I was mentioning earlier,
oh,
trusted
okay,
advisors,
okay,
and it's everything from insurance to mortgage to realtor.
okay,
We've we got all kinds of interesting things, and of course there's the tech side of things too. People that just like to talk about tech or the world in general. So I definitely got a list of people I
okay,
can put you in touch
cool.
with.
Yeah. I won't make you list them. I won't make you list them. You can just send me the information. All right, cool.
And now a word from our sponsors.
Oh God, I don't have any sponsors yet. We could talk about biohacking another time because I have this like Whoop blood biohacker thing, like so I can keep track of like heart
Right.
rate and fitness and stuff. Hey Whoop, if you want to sponsor me, I'm okay with that. But yeah, I'll go ahead and let you go. Could you stay on a little bit for the tech stuff
Yep.
afterwards? So everybody, I don't have a scheduled guest next weekend yet. I might have somebody by then. If not, I might just do like a solo kind of thing. I might talk about blockchain a little bit, or have a retrospective on the last 6 podcasts and kind of talk about stuff that we talked about in those 6 podcasts, and kind of explain the future of the podcast, what's happening, studio changes. Obviously, the background's different. There's more going to be happening back here. JJ, thanks for joining us, and I'll talk to you a little bit after we hang up here.
Thanks for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thanks a lot.